Cosmic here, and welcome back to another Chaos Zero Nightmare video. And after a ton of requests, I'm finally updating my overall guide for every single 5-star in the game now that it's post-launch. And at the time of recording this, I am currently in difficulty 4 with the count level 34. So I've learned a lot, I gotta say, in how much things have changed, but keep in mind I do not have access to every single one of these characters. So while this is largely just a theory crafting practice, I do think I've gained a bit of insight, and I wanted to share them and give my thoughts on the current 5-star pool. Now again, I am streaming on Twitch and YouTube when I have time, so you can go through those VODs if you want, but I did pull for Haru, which I'll do a much more detailed deep dive on because I've spent about 20 hours playing her now. And then I also have Hugo and Veronica, which if you caught our last video, you'll know that they'll mostly fill a support role, which is fine, but still are both very, very good characters to get. So with that out of the way, let's just dive in. And of course, we're gonna be starting with Luke, which is still one of the characters I really wish I would have got. And funny enough, I will also include the changes that I noticed, or at least the big ones, and Luke got buffed, which is really nice. So overall, I'm going to be talking about, like, what is the play style, what is the payoff, what are the builders, and just kind of talk through the high level overview of each of these characters. So Luke is all about being a bullet spam heavy style of character where you're just gonna be throwing out all these zero cost targets at your opponent. Now his brother Lucas is also a bullet user, which goes into this and we'll cover in a little bit more detail later, but generally you're always going to want to have these two together and build up a larger hand size for two different reasons. Luke has a really nice payoff with lethal design of just getting a bunch of extra damage because you're gonna be generating cards every turn, and plus now with Mika's retained cards, which are very, very good, it's very easy to get into 7, 8, or 9 card hands because you're holding on to these extra cards to line that up. So it's a very nice damage nuke. And then the other one, Dance of Demons, which is very similar to what we had during the limited playtest. You're just getting a bunch of extra damage hits. Now, the one thing that I do want to change, and I'll talk about again also later as we get into it, but Nia has changed completely. So that is the one thing that you'll notice is gone from the previous version. Nia got not only a complete rework, but we also lost our little damage dealing increaser for how some of the builds worked. Now, neutral cards will fill this role, but at this time, without having a proper database of all the neutrals or how some of the upgrades will work, and that'll probably take a little time to get there, it's really hard to kind of showcase or otherwise highlight some of these neutral cards until I, well, get them myself and can put them into a video. So do keep in mind as a overall theme to this video, it'll also happen with Rin and a few others, that if something is a multi-hit style of card, it generally has lower damage. So anytime that we see a card that has morale, which gives you plus 20% attack increase per stack it has, we want to find those style of cards to go into these decks, because when you factor in the multi-hit capability, those damage amps really skyrocket in value because you're getting to do so much with them. When I get into the Haru kit, I know a lot of people don't like the plus 30 damage one. However, if you build the multi-hit Haru, those cards suddenly become very, very good. So do keep that in mind. There seems to be a very big trend difference between what works really well with small multi-hit style of decks and what works for the large one-hit style, all-in slam. So that'll be something you'll see kind of repeated throughout this video. Now for builders, oh my god, did we get an upgrade, which is so nice. So Rapid Fire not only gained a huge critical chance buff, making it a lot better to use in the early game, but it also gained Retrieve, which means when you play it one time, so Retrieve, if it just has Retrieve 1 or to Retrieve 2, however many times you get it back. So with Retrieve, this means we can play Rapid Fire, especially in the late game where we're going to generate, extra bullets, and 2 in this case, and then you get to bring it back to your hand and generate even more bullets. So I just talked about how getting the extra bullet generation really matters for Luke, both for his ego skill payoff as well as Dance of Demons. He also got Final Bullet, which says you have to use 5 bullets in a turn. It's a 200 damage hit. So really helped pull his entire kit together. And then similar to the last video that we had with Stealth Reload, we want to be able to make sure that we're having card generation over turn, so that as we're looking through our deck and as we're trying to draw different hand combinations, we want to have the extra bullets either to go into the RPG for Lucas or just having extra damage instances, right? So Luke is going to be all about the guns blazing, multiple attacks per turn, which admittedly does have a drawback in some situations where enemies are going to be having a very low attack count threshold before they attack you, so that can be a downside to Luke, but this still remains one of the characters that I really want to get and playtest with, because I think it would just be a very fun style of deck to play, but unfortunately we do not have him yet. Now his brother Lucas, of course, is still the MVP of who you want to pair with him. We're going to be getting extra bullets, which, as we mentioned, there are cards that get benefits from either being in your hand or being bullets and consuming them. So RPG being one of them, that just gives us a flat 40 fixed damage. Now keep in mind that this did change from the limited playtest and or was an error. I didn't test this one personally, just looking at the old text that we had where it was an AoE effect. It's now just a single target, and truthfully that's fine anyways, because with the AoE style stuff you're gonna have lower thresholds on those units where we just want extra damage against like our weekly bosses and things of that nature. So RPG is still just going to be the goated upgrade. Extended magazine I really like here as well, because we had to change this entire kit. I also changed some of the support epiphanies that we want to target with Lucas, is that now we get 2 launcher bullets per turn. Now again, keep in mind that these do have a cost of 1, so they're more expensive, but we did change to Mika in this case, which is going to give us the extra action points that we need. And then lastly, the Triple S, which either don't know if this one is a new card or I just missed it in my last build because my resource for updating this was already gone, but for 2 turns plus 40% bullet card damage. This is so great to have this extra damage amp that suddenly you're going up to, you know, from 40 to like 90% damage or even higher with some of the launcher bullets. So Triple S, I really like this for giving us that damage amp that I mentioned that we were missing, and just further emphasizes why Lucas is so good. And then of course we got to talk about just shortly, as I kind of been hinting at, that Mika got reworked, and as I've been playing more and more, I've been learning just, well, how good Retain is, because in a lot of situations, Blessing of Waves, when you, especially like this one is absolutely correct. I cannot stress enough. The obviously, other than generating AP, is very good, but for the early game, especially for how much stronger shielders are, Blessing of Waves, where you get the shield on overhealing, is the only reason I am staying alive in difficulty 4 with some of my builds. Getting this and being able to like throw up a random 200 shield out of nowhere is so important for giving you that little extra survivability that you need. Otherwise, for this deck in particular, I would recommend trying to get a couple more of her retained based epiphanies, which are generally not as good, but we do want to make sure that we have a large enough hand on the turns that we're going into Luke's big payoff. And then also keep in mind, it does count as the upgrades, right? In terms of it's thinning our deck. Now, yes, when you play them, they'll go back into your deck, get shuffled, what have you, but at least in the short term, you will be able to hold those cards in your hand, meaning you're more likely to draw, well, the rapid fires and the stealth reloads, for example, as we're trying to build out Luke. So if you are still excited for the idea of just a multi-hit, fast firing kind of guy, then Luke is definitely still the 5-star of choice to pick. If you're enjoying the content, then make sure to drop a like and also subscribe to the channel to make sure you're not missing out on any Chaos Zero Nightmare videos, because we're going to be having free-to-play guides as well as character reviews as soon as they're happening. So every bit of support helps out the channel. With that out of the way, let's get back to the video. And moving on from there, we have Renoa, which, well, unfortunately, her zero-cost bullet build was completely scrapped. The upgrade was removed. However, on the good news is that if you caught one of our last videos, her main payoff got changed to the exhaust is no longer a tag on it. So we can now more reliably have these big damage nuke turns instead of being a one and done and then going, oh my god, what's going on? I have nothing left to use, right? So she is still largely the same if you were already excited for the build your hand up, craft your deck for this big explosive turn, and then just watch your opponent fall over. Now again, with the Dirge bullets, you're able to still just get damage as they're being discarded anyway, so it's not like you're just having these off style of turns like, say, Barrel, who does require you to hold onto cards for multiple turns, really lean into the retain mechanic, and then have this one big flashy finish, right? Renoa still does decent damage while you're using her normally or just firing off the bullets, because why not, with this bigger payoff. So by being able to have the ego skill that puts all the Dirge bullets into your hand and then going with the last ditch assault, you are going to do massive amounts of damage. And then, of course, how to build that up. We have generally these same cards. The only difference here is that we're now going to be focused on, well, how do we get as many Dirge bullets as possible so we can try to get that last ditch assault going and online as quick as possible. So we are still using Echoes of Sorrow. So you'll notice that some cards here I did not change the visual because they are literally the same that they were in the limited playtest. The only other one I changed here was the Flower of the Devoured, because it's just a way to get 3 additional Dirge bullets. So again, trying to ramp up into that as quickly quickly as possible. Now, with that, because we are going to be drawing or putting a bunch of bullets into our deck, and we will reduce the ability to draw into that one exact card that we want, it turns out Rey is, well, pretty good in this instance. So snack time is really important because it does help thin your deck. It's going to exhaust itself, +2, most likely basic cards that you don't want to draw anyways, and on the turn that you need it, it's going to draw you into the last ditch assault. That is really helpful for just making sure that you're getting that one big damage turn when you really need it. And then otherwise, it's important to note that she does have a nice upgrade, which is going to increase the damage from the bullets. And then need to know here is that with her skill, you can choose an attack card and just continue to buff it up. So in that case, because this card has retained the last ditch assault, we can just go through our deck, continue to stack the damage until we're ready to use it. You know, there are some situations where you want to use other effects to string together, but at least for when looking at her upgrades, it's like, okay, fine. You know, last ditch assault in a lot of situations is going to be stuck in our hands for multiple turns, if not multiple deck cycles while we're building up our bullets. So, that seems good enough. This is one that, again, I will have to test, but at least from a high level does seem very good. And then another thing to note here is that we, of course, are using Mika, spoiler, for the AP generation, because there are going to be some turns where we don't have other decent attacks to use, and we just want to make sure that we're still dealing some damage. So you will want to save up for 4 or 5 AP based turns, and it'll be really good for that, as well as keeping in mind we have things like retain. We do want to use those so that we can fill up our hand with dirge bullets. So on the turn that you're looking to pop off and use the big ego skill, fill up your hand, do keep in mind that the hand limit is 10, and to not, go over your hand size. Or if you are, having a bunch of those 0 costs that you can cycle through is very important, so that Mika isn't clogging up your hand either. So that is something that you will have to balance out. Moving on from Kayron, another upgrade that where the 0 cost dream is dead. So Kayron did get changed as well, who is now he's still very good. He still has his massive AoE nuke and his massive single target nuke. Those didn't really go away. The only thing that went away was the 0 cost spam with the cards that he could generate, which would have probably been really fun and just really lean into more of his single target damage and having more flexibility with it. But I think this is a overall good, just like design flavor change that they did to remove that build. But overall, you are going to be looking into either using the Rift of Nothingness, his ego skill, which is going to banish all of his cards, the futility cards in his hand for massive damage increase. So you are going to be able to push up to 600% AoE nuke with the ego skill. Really great for, of course, farming stages and things of that nature. And then we have the Black Hole, which again is going to be single target now, but getting extra damage for every exhausted futility that you've been burning through. So yes, this is something that is going to require a little bit of buildup, but on the other side where we're putting dirge bullets into our deck from a void user perspective, this one is just we're exhausting the cards as long as we're spending the AP and getting them out of there, and then we can go into this one big damage nuke. Same thing, we do have the various builders use Echoes of Truth Abyss. It's going to create 3 cards and put it into your hand, and then you get to deal the extra damage, just something that's building up and letting us get those cards. And then Echo of Futility with the X cost, which again, there is a gear that gives you +2, and then you get to do a massive card generation with this. Now again, the biggest thing to note here is that because we have removed the 0 cost spam, you absolutely have to run Mika in this build in all situations, because you are very AP hungry now. And most importantly is that the hand limit is 10. So having things that we can, play out of our hand, get some extra action points, and then make sure we're making room for the, big effects of making sure we're generating cards to our hand is very, very important. Now, the one thing with recycling I do want to note here, because I couldn't find an updated image, this card did get nerfed. It only gives you +1 action point. However, that is still, very good for what this deck wants to be doing. So I very strongly recommend finding recycling for Mika if you are doing this type of build. Now, unfortunately, my boy Cassius did get nerfed a little bit with some of the AP cost changes and what have you, but he is still very, very good for what he wants to be doing. Cassius, as I'm sure you are aware by now, is still the king of card draw and selection. And when we have characters like Kayron, it's really important that we're always finding those key pieces at the key time to lead into those those big payoffs. So having Joker is just a great way to guarantee we're drawing what we need for that turn. Devil Dice is a surprisingly good attack that with just a draw 2, discard 2, and again, the 240 damage for 1 is nothing to scoff at either. And then Pop-Eyed Popper, I just like going for this one because it lets you select the quest that you're looking for. And in this build in particular, because we have a bunch of different cards we want to be playing, you know, you can go for full house to get even more draw as you're building into this, right? Cassius is going to have a bunch of low-cost cards that we don't mind playing. Mika is going to often play things for free, so you get to be AP neutral in what you're spending between Cassius and Mika. And then whenever you play a card from Kayron, you're able to trigger full house, draw 1 extra card, and then see how the rest of your turn is going to go, right? We still have some basic cards that we could use in that scenario to then hopefully draw into the big payoff. So Cassius has been very good to me in all the testing that I've been doing and remains kind of the MVP. So I'm very excited for, you know, spending a little bit more time with him at endgame to see where this goes. But overall, Kayron's still kind of like the MVP to me, at least, and I can't wait to eventually get him. That has a huge AoE damage nuke whenever you want it, and then also with Black Hole, this does get up to pretty high damage. It does take a little bit of build-up, so it's not as fast maybe as some of the other builds. Kind of like Haru that does need to charge up her anchor shot. Black Hole does feel that same way, but when you get there and when they get to live that big dream of doing, you know, 1200% damage, right? It feels pretty good to watch that big slam happen. Up next, we have Rin with her changes, and honestly didn't change all that much, at least in spirit for how she plays. The biggest change for her is that her effect changed from her own cards to just skill cards in general, which, spoiler, Maribel and any support you want is going to work for that regard, right? So it is double, 1 sustain, 1 support is what you're going to want to build for her. She's a very combo heavy style of feel. And then the other part that we talk about is, again, with the multi-damage style effects, right? So both of these are going to be counting damage or instances of damage count. So this is, again, where we really want to see things that boost that damage. And we do have 2 different cards that either give plus damage in this case, like the Dark Mist Inner, as long as you're in that stance, you get it. And then the Secret Art, which is going to allow you to draw one of her cards. So if you're missing one of the key payoffs, we do have another way to not only draw into it, but then give it another plus 50% attack boost. So this is the kind of stuff that Luke wants to see, you know, any type of damage boost that we can get. And there might be a neutral card, right, that does this, that says, hey, your attacks for this turn, and if it says your attacks, it would be Luke, so you have to put it in Luke's deck, but it might say your attacks this turn gain plus 20% damage, right? Well, when Luke wants to do like 7 attacks a turn, that's a pretty good increase. So we'll have to wait and see what other neutral cards we might get. And then I did want to add a little bit of a note here because the Dark Mist Secret Art, this one gives you plus attack hits if you're able to be in the right stance, but there is a endgame option of getting 100% critical damage if you are in the stance. So once we get to endgame, you're able to min-max your memory fragments and your other gear. Like the 100% crit damage, I'm sure is just going to be vastly superior. So do keep that in mind. Again, this is just a early look at each one of these builds and what have you, but I think that's just something I had to add while I was going through these. Now, as I mentioned, we have Maribel because we need some type of sustain. It's also very nice that a lot of the sustain cards are all upgrade heavy in how you want to be using them. So if you have, you know, Magna, you could definitely put her here as well. Khalipe doesn't really work because Khalipe wants to be in a deck that has 2 AP or higher cost cards for the Celestial to get the most value, which you're never going to get out of Rin other than like the 1 card that she has. So it's just not going to be as reliable. Now, again, I try to not hammer this too much, but neutral cards are going to be very important. So if you find a really good neutral skill card at a shop or from an event, like just pick it up, throw it in Maribel's deck, and that's also going to help just get into some of the other stronger effects like the extra draw, or if there's one that gives like a massive shield and then exhaust themselves. Those can be really helpful when you just need 1 turn to set up, or if you're just find yourself against a massive attack coming in from your opponent. Being able to shield up an emergency situation is really important in staying alive. And of course, she has her ego skill, which just gives you a 350% shield, which is really nice. And then lastly, we got to talk about Nia and her combo changes. Like, it is a completely new kit. I'm going to be so real with y'all. I do not know exactly where it's going to fit. I miss the old kit so much. But what is important enough to note is that her G chord, it lets you look at the top 3 cards and pick one to activate. this is really important for triggering Rin's abilities to be in her stance, which you do get off of her basic cards. So G-Cord can also give you a AP cheat in that regard, because it can trigger her 2 AP sword and then just do a bunch of damage and put you in the stance, right? Adiago gives you the discard 1 and draw 2 cards of that person, so you're going to be able to target Rin in this case, then draw 2 of her cards, which is really nice. And then lastly, Nia's Curiosity, reveal 3 random cards from the draw pile, choose 1 to draw, discard the rest, right? We are just all in trying to find cards that allow us to get into more of what Rin wants to be doing. And also very important to note, at least for what I could find on Pridewin, Rin still does have the stack issue of if you use another unit's attack card, she'll have to fall out of that stance. So naturally, you do want to be in a very heavy skill-focused base deck as you're building this out, but it does have the really nice combo payoff with Rin being able to do some surprising amount of damage. So if you like building up your deck and finding those key patterns of finding that big combo payoff to do a lot of flashy hits, then Rin is also a really great 5-star to use. Now, this one I just have to give a massive disclaimer to, because Mei Lin did have some small changes, and this one is very hard to figure out where it's going to land. So Mei Lin does seem to have 2 kind of different payoffs, right? You're gonna have one that is all in on, you know, getting extra hit for your basic cards, making them do plus 100% damage, and just combo punching down your opponent. And then we have the other side, which gets plus 1 hit for every passion card that you've used during that turn. So this is one that at least I have an idea, right, of which way it's gonna go. And we have the Unity upgrade now. This is another card that I swapped out that gets used 2 strike cards, and they'll have a -1 cost. So you're putting extra 0 cost cards into your deck to, you know, build up into things like the Rising Dragon Spire, or just dealing damage, because with the Flame Dragon's Jewel upgrade, we can give Passion Weakness for the team, which means we're just going to always have that, you know, elemental advantage. So this is one that feels like it also wants to be a combo deck, but doesn't have as much of the drawing options like for Rin, where Rin is just like, am I in the stance? Did I draw the 1 payoff card? Great. Mei Lin is now, I have to have my damage output be very focused around all these various, you know, situations that eventually lead into it. Now, Selena still is going to be like the other goated passion user that we want to use for this team, because we still gain the drone bombing, which gives you just extra sources of damage. We have Mark, which is just going to be a free, you know, 100% attack every turn as you're marking them up and using attack. And then also with target spotted, just applying more of those stacks. So this remains a deck that's all about debuffs, making sure that you're always going to have elemental advantage, making sure that you're always breaking their tenacity bar, which again gives you a action point and heals some stress. But how will this actually play out? I am very curious. And again, Nia, I think here is still the one that you're going to want to use. The downside here that I have to add, right, is that means that we do not have a dedicated sustain, so you do need to find neutral healing cards, and there are some very good ones that you can find. So we'll have to see how much that we can build out and make this all come together. Unfortunately, it might just come back to the fact that like you have to run Mika instead because you just need a big healer, or again, any shielder works as well. And we're trying to put this all together. This is definitely, you know, one that was like very straightforward, has a good home. And now because we've seen some of the cards change and going into the, you know, Heavenly Flame ego skill being like the big thing now of having the +1 attack, or +1 hits, excuse me, on basic attacks, I need to brew. Keep in mind, you're also applying embers while you're doing this. You are getting extra damage sources as well. So at a very high level, this is all a multi-hit, extra damage sources, getting extra attacks through the passion coordinated attacks. It feels like there is something there, but definitely one that I'm looking forward to seeing how maybe the later chaos stages are also going to change it. But that will at least give you an idea of what to look forward to. And again, the second that we get like a passion support that also has a bunch of 0 cost stuff that we can loop with this, is going to be really insane for Rising Dragon Spire, because I feel like this is the one that wants to be the biggest payoff. So basically, if Mika was just passion instead of the justice or blue, right, would be absolutely bonkers for this deck. So Mei Lin, I think, is still very good, but she will be absolutely insane if we get another 0 spam passion unit to go and build into this team. Now, yes, we gotta get into who I called the support troops last time, and well, they do still kind of feel that way, but there were some noticeable changes. But Veronica still remains the I want to help you draw other characters' cards from the deck, and I will just passively do damage every turn. And look, in an AoE setting, she still does insane damage. thanks to reload, the giant ballista is gonna clear for you. Like, it's really, really good. I want to stress that. But, you know, still one of the best things that she is otherwise doing is just drawing other cards to combo with, right? So ultimately, I do want to stress, like, I am the support DPS for any damage dealer that you want to be using. So in this case, I'm just showcasing Owen as a free-to-play example. You can use any damage dealer of your choice, but I promise, he is fine. I get he's not exciting, but I promise you, he is a decent unit. And it's also important to note that when we have things like the Giant Ballista, which is going to be 150% extra attack to the entire field, when we combine that with the Wind Slash, which we can then also give a extra hit to, we have a shocking amount of AoE damage that is pretty consistent. And then if we get extra Ballista generation through some of her other cards, right? A double Giant Ballista turn, or one that just is get amped up from the various effects, like, it is a shocking amount of damage that this can pump out. Now, again, the downside here is that this is going to be a lot more, say, AoE focused in that regard. If we're using the example of Owen, he really only has the Gale Strike to give a 250 damage attack here, but it does give a little bit of shield, which is important because there are going to be turns where you go like Blessing Wave into Gale Strike, or I guess you'll technically have 4 AP if you're using like the Mika turn, right? But you'll have like Blessing Wave into Wind Riding into Gale Strike, and that'll give you a very sizable shield, surprisingly, a lot of times, right? So that'll be very nice to see. And then again, because this style of build goes into more like 4 action point curves a little bit more, right? Because you're going to be playing the Sir Kowalski, which draws you into cards, which, well, you're going to want to use that turn most often. So Mika really here is for the actual AP generation time and time again. But also the last thing I want to note here is with her Whirlpool upgrade, because this eventually becomes free as you're cycling through your deck, getting a bunch of heals, that this can line up to, again, just be a really great source of extra AoE damage. So this one definitely falls more into the hey, how am I building up my AoE team? And there are some nice things that we can do. Like the Whirlpool has been surprisingly good as I've been using it in difficulty 4 in some setups. And then Owen, again, if we just get any other AoE focused character, can be really good. Now, I won't go as far to say like, oh my God, just play, use it with Kayron, which you technically could, but that's another example where you have a big AoE nuke that you can rely on, and then Veronica is just going to do an extra little bit of damage on top for free. So if you got Veronica, I think that she is still a very good support and definitely fits on a lot of teams. You'll just have to figure out which build you exactly want to use with her. And then following that same route, I gotta give up to Hugo. I did get Hugo on my account, and I do have a E1 with him, so I'm very excited to brew with this a little bit more. But I will say, when I did a run with this in difficulty 4, I had too many stacks of the hunting commence the hunt cards. I had an idea that I would, because Tressa is so skill heavy, that we would be building up all these stacks to then have a big payoff, but wow, it was a lot. So yes, the most amount of your damage once you get the upgrades going is actually going to be coming from Hugo. The downside is that he takes a very long time to build up. Like, you have to go through your entire deck at least once, and then you finally get to do all the extra stuff. So do keep that in mind, is that this is a little bit slower to ramp up, especially compared to some of the other 5 stars I've played with or I've seen other people use. But generally the way it's going to work, you're going to play out all your upgrades, which is, again, great for thinning out your deck. Spam some skills, which is going to give you the stacks, and then you can do things like Quick Fix, which will draw you into more attack cards. I, again, will be fully honest, the number one issue I ran into with this deck, or like with this setup that I use, is my deck did not have enough attack cards. Like, I wanted extra neutral attack cards just because I was generating so many stacks thanks to Tressa. Now, keep in mind, I did not find the Shadow Reload Epiphany that gave me the extra, or the card that gave me the extra daggers, which would have helped out a ton, but it still remains to be seen in terms of like, hey, what other neutral card do I want to put in here that's an attack to trigger more of those stacks? So Hugo, if you want to have like, get screamed at Lightning Dingo 1,000 times as you're playing every day, then definitely look forward to, building up the stacks, spending them all with Tressa's daggers, building up the, Agony turn over turn. And this does have a surprising amount of single target damage. Now, that is a downside I have to add. As we were just talking about Veronica and having a very nice amount of AoE spread, this team itself is all in on the single target and is very, very, very difficult. I have found out that if there's any AoE adds at all, you're going to be having a very bad time. Cannot stress that enough. So do be mindful of the content that you're doing and what bosses to expect, because you might just low roll, unfortunately, and lose out because they are a AoE heavy focus. And then lastly, just giving a shout out here to Maribel. Any sustain works, right? Because they have skill cards, which is then going to give you more stacks off of Hugo. And again, keeping in mind that the counterattacks here are just going to be giving us more sources of damage. So there's a lot of like go wide, as we'll call it, and trickle damage that we can do. You know, Agony's doing damage. The counterattacks are doing damage. The Lightning Dingos are doing damage. That it's not all in one burst source. But if you're on a single target, it's great. But if it is AoE, you are going to be lacking just a little bit. And then last but not least, yes, we have the last three that, you know, don't really fit the scope of like how the rest of this video had went, but I think at least I do need to talk about them at a high level. So Orlea is still all in retain focus. Her kit really didn't change that much. The one thing I'll note is that the growth acceleration off of Pridon says select one card in hand, trigger retain effect 2 times. This can work with Beryl, I guess, and just amp up her damage. You know, if you don't need it to use it for one of your other retain cards, I guess, but she still remains entirely greedy and feels like a character that, well, you just kind of have to run with Magna and with Khalipe because they are like the more defensive units that can go the distance. So this definitely feels like a very expensive team to put together, but it probably is something that, you know, the creature combination thing that it does, I think, is like really cool, and I think that's a neat effect. But the one thing that I'm the most excited about is to see how this particular growth acceleration plays out in the meta as we get more interesting retain style of the cards. Magna did not change really. Huge AoE potential in her upgrades, lots of shields, counterattacks, being able to hit every single target. She has a shocking amount of AoE damage while having very high defense. Again, however, the downside being is that you do need to be attacked to get her effect to work. So she is going to be, you know, a tier lower in that regard. And then lastly, I'm sure you all know it by now, but Khalipe is still insane. Celestial is just a busted keyword in all situations. I've gotten some neutral cards during our runs with Celestial as well, and because I'm running Haru, like, you see how much value you get out of this. So if I get Khalipe in my Haru build, right, like I will run Khalipe and Haru in the same team and just have insane amount of value. So the maybe downside that I'll call it, right, for being more conditional is that Khalipe does need another 2 AP heavy unit like Haru to team with, or you're not going to be triggering Celestial as much. You're going to be putting a lot more effort into, you know, finding 2 cost neutral cards to make sure that you're still activating the effects. But otherwise, it's going to feel a little bad to play in some situations. But otherwise, like, her kit is just so good. It is always going to be worth it to make sure that she does what she wants to be doing. So a little bit longer of a video, but I want to do some very quick highlights here at the end to help you get started in Chaos Zero Nightmare with whatever 5-star that you ended up getting, either if you were a no re-roller like me, or if you spent the multiple hours, if not maybe days if you're watching this later, to ramp up and get that perfect start that you always wanted. I really hope you were able to get your units very early on and not be stuck in re-roll jail the entire time. So I'll be doing a very detailed breakdown on Haru once I have time to record it and get a little bit more practice in difficulty 4, because I feel like that's when you really start to see how builds come online. But otherwise, don't forget to like and subscribe for future Chaos Zero Nightmare content. So until next time, my friends, stay safe, stay hydrated, and we'll see you in the next video. Cheers.